Everything was normal until that night. She never came home, and something showed up on the camera that shouldn't have been there. He grew up in Indiana. He was an ordinary guy living an ordinary life. He had a job and a girlfriend he loved. But one day, everything changed. One day he vanished without a trace. It's a mystery that to this day has not been solved. So what really happened to him? He was a 20-year-old student at Ohio State University studying business. He had his whole life ahead of him. He was also very popular among his peers. He was a kind and funny guy who always knew how to make people laugh. He was also very smart and dedicated to his studies. They had no leads and no suspects, and everyone was beginning to lose hope. However, there was one lead that the police were still pursuing, and when they showed it to Brian's family, they made a shocking discovery. In the footage, they saw Brian leaving the bar and getting into a car. They continued to search for him, and they never lost hope that they would find him one day. A woman called the police and said that she had seen Brian at a park in town. People in town eventually forgot about him and moved on with their lives. A man named Ryan was walking through the woods near his house when he came across a backpack. He opened it up and found a pair of shoes inside. He took them home and put them in his closet. He didn't think much of it until one day he was cleaning out his closet and came across the backpack. He took the shoes out and noticed that they looked just like the ones Brian had been wearing the night he disappeared. He immediately called the police, and they were able to match the shoes to Brian. But Brian's family never gave up. They continued to search for him every day, hoping that one day they would find him. He also found a wallet and some other personal belongings that belonged to Brian. This was a major breakthrough in the case, and police were able to use these items to finally solve it. They were able to track down Brian's DNA and compare it to the DNA found at the scene of the crime. And the results were a match. Brian had finally been found. The police were immediately dispatched to the scene, but they arrived too late. Brian was gone. The woman described him as looking disheveled and as if he had not bathed in days. But despite the sighting, the police were still unable to locate him. And don't forget to subscribe for more creepypasta stories. Thanks for watching. Signing out. The police were able to determine that he had been the victim of foul play and that he had been murdered by an unknown assailant. They hope that one day they will be able to find his killer and bring them to justice. But despite the fact that they were finally able to solve the case, they were still unable to find out who was responsible for Brian's death. The killer had managed to evade the police for all these years, and they were still at large. They put up posters with his picture on them all around town and even hired a private investigator to look into his disappearance. But despite their best efforts, they were unable to find any answers. But the car was not a normal one. It was a white van that had been rented by a man named Paul. Paul had rented the van the day before and had returned it that same day. But when the police questioned him, he said that he had no idea what they were talking about. He said that he had rented the van and had returned it, but he had no idea what they were talking about. When pressed further, Paul broke down and confessed that he had indeed seen Brian at the bar, but he had only spoken to him briefly and had no idea what had happened to him. They had a grainy security camera footage of Brian leaving the Copa bar, and they were hoping that if they could track down the people who had taken the video, they may be able to get some answers. The only problem was that the footage was extremely grainy, and it was difficult to make out any details. But above all, he was a loving boyfriend. He was crazy in love with his girlfriend, Rebecca. They had been dating for a few months, and everything seemed to be going well. They spent most of their time together. They searched his house and his car, but they found nothing. And as the months turned into years, the case went cold and the police eventually gave up on it. They went to parties, movies, and even just stayed in watching TV. They were truly happy together. It all started in the summer of 1987. Back then, Brian Schaefer was just an ordinary young man. After a romantic dinner at a seafood restaurant, they went to a bar called Scully's. His friends and family were out looking for him until the early hours of the morning, but they found nothing. The police were also called and a massive search effort was launched. But Brian was nowhere to be found. They checked all of his favorite spots, but there was no sign of him. And as the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade that he would ever be seen again. They were having so much fun dancing and drinking. They were so into each other that they forgot about everything else. But after a few hours, Brian decided to go to another bar called the Copa. He told Rebecca that he was just going to get another beer and then come back. But he never came back. At first, Rebecca didn't think much of it. She knew that Brian was a free spirit and could sometimes be irresponsible. But as the night wore on and Brian still didn't return, she began to get worried. She tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried calling his friends and family, but no one knew where he was. Something was wrong. On June 29, 1987, Brian and Rebecca were celebrating their 3-month anniversary. As the night wore on, more and more people joined the search for Brian. Now, despite the fact that Brian had been missing for over a month, the police were no closer to solving the case. But as luck would have it, the police were able to track down the owner of the bar who had the security camera footage. Despite Paul's confession, the police were still unable to find any evidence to link him to Brian's disappearance. However, Brian's family was not ready to give up. One day, however, something strange happened. As the years passed, the search for Brian became less and less frequent. Then in 2017, almost 30 years after Brian had disappeared, something amazing happened. But that was not the only thing that Ryan found. And so after all these years, the mystery of what happened to Brian was finally solved. This case remains unsolved to this day, and the family of Brian are still searching for justice for him. So what do you think happened to Brian? Do you think his killer will ever be caught? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.